That's a great number that we've got. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm delighted to welcome you all to session 2 of CoMoUK's conference, Reimagining Curbside Space. My name is Laura Wright, and I'm the Head of Programmes for CoMoUK. We have an excellent group of speakers who will present the work they have been doing around curbside strategies and related areas. Before I introduce them, I would like to take the opportunity to briefly highlight CoMoUK's work in this important area. Firstly, CoMoUK's Mobility Hub journey. We have carried out a lot of work in this area and have listed below a few highlights. Firstly, advocacy for spatial planning reform. One of our aims here is to make transport sustainable developments easier to do. A few examples are feeding into consultation on the National Planning Policy Framework and producing documents such as the new developments and shared transport guidance. My wonderful colleague Patrick will be popping these links to the various documents that I talk about in the chat, so you can have a look at them later. CoMoUK has been working on mobility hubs since 2019, and we continue to grow and develop our work in this area, and over the years have produced a number of documents. We produce guidance for local authorities to aid local authorities in the commissioning of mobility hubs, and we produce guidance for planners and developers to support planners and developers in the creation of mobility hubs, and this includes our Mobility Hubs Toolkit. This work has progressed to Mobility Hub accreditation. We have gold, silver and bronze accreditation, as well as accreditation for community mobility hubs. Each type of hub in our accreditation standard comes with a set of suggested requirements to meet the requirements and achievements to achieve the accreditation. There are different levels of requirements for gold, silver or bronze. The accreditation provides many benefits to those developing hubs. It provides a useful checklist. It helps to maintain high standards and shines a light on high quality hubs. It provides examples of good practice to others developing hubs. And also accreditation can support funding and planning permission. All of this work has fed in and led to our pop-up hubs. CoMoUK has funding from Pass for All for 2 pop-up mobility hubs, which have been rotated around a number of locations within Inverness, Forth Valley and Glasgow in 23-24. We currently have 1 hub in Inverness and 1 in Glasgow. Hubs can have various components and formats, but the features of our hubs are we have a bike hire station, and in Inverness we work with High Bikes, and in Glasgow it's with Next Bike. We have a bike repair kit and pump. We have planting, and we've worked with local schools and community groups to plant and maintain the shrubs. We have accessible seating, and we also have a totem which can be updated with sustainable transport information, including active travel activities and public transport. The pop-up mobility hubs are such a fun and visible tool for engaging people in active travel. They're a great base for bike try-out sessions, for led walks, which help soft build community buy-in. The hubs can be expanded or co-located with other relevant low carbon options, such as a space for car club vehicles, and they also aid in the development of a kerbside strategy. In terms of benefits of the hubs, they can benefit road space reallocation. This particular hub in this picture is in Mount Florida, in Glasgow, and it's located on the road in line with Glasgow Transport Strategy Policy 50, which states that the Council will work to ensure new sustainable transport interventions do not take up pavement space where possible, and road space reallocation is considered first and foremost. It also really helps with any future mobility hub plans. It's an excellent engagement tool to liaise with communities and residents to get their views on mobility hubs, including locations and any elements they would like included. It also supports any potential or existing or potential bike sharing or e-scooter sharing. As I mentioned previously, in Glasgow, the pop-up is used as a hire station for Nextbike, and in Inverness, it's a docking station for HiBike. And HiTrans, the regional transport partner who run the bike share scheme, are using the hubs to test locations for permanent docking stations. Community engagement and buy-in is really key. The hubs are a great talking point and help to engage people and start conversations. We have worked with community councils and partnered with active travel organisations to deliver a range of active travel activities, including Dr. Bike, led walks, bike maintenance, and even skateboarding sessions, as well as attended many community events. This has helped raise the profile of active and sustainable transport options and activities in the area. In terms of pop-up impact, we have just over a year since we had our first pop-up in place. And you'll see the figures below. We have 8 pop-up locations so far in 3 local authorities. The hubs are normally in place for around 6 to 8 weeks. And we plan to have popped up in a total of 12 locations by the end of March 2025. We've so far facilitated over 395 bike share journeys, and that's over Nextbike and HiBike. And we have run 26 activity sessions for 441 people of all different ages and backgrounds. So if you want to find out more about our work, I have detailed some next steps. So you can find out more about our Mobility Hub accreditation by scanning the QR code. And you can find out about the opportunity to lease or purchase the pop-up hubs from April 2025. And Patrick, you'll see Patrick will put in the chat, I'm sure he will have some information around our Mobility Hub consultancy work. Thank you so much for listening. I would like to now go on and introduce to you our speakers for this morning. So we have, first of all, we have PJ Bell from the London Borough of Hounslow. PJ, would you like to take over?
Sure, sounds great.
Thank you.
All right, hopefully everyone can see it okay. So thanks for having me. I'm a strategic projects manager at Hounslow, and I'll be discussing our curbside strategy, which was approved in July. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the strategy and then highlight mostly the shared mobility elements of the plan. I'll then outline our curbside spatial framework before ending with a few lessons learned. So the curbside is one of Hounslow's biggest public spaces, and our strategy seeks to better balance curbside uses. So the aim is to support street design that encourages the use of active travel and public transport, helping create safe, healthy, and livable streets for all ages and abilities. The strategy was created alongside our parking strategy, recognizing that many people and businesses do rely on cars. And it's all about balancing these modes while pushing to achieve ambitious local and regional mode share targets. Some key objectives of the plan include more sustainable mobility, improved health and well-being, building resilience and adaptability, strengthening communities through better places, and finally, improved accessibility and inclusion. I don't have time to cover all the public engagement that did go into this plan, but here's a really quick snapshot. There were many events, surveys, and outreach across many different platforms that went into this plan. And we did the parking strategy and the curbside strategy engagement at the same time in parallel. So the curbside strategy is divided into 7 themes, from car clubs and micromobility to urban greening, placemaking, and freight. As mentioned today, I'm really going to focus on those shared mobility aspects. And just to note, this strategy does not touch on things like vehicle parking, EV charging, or cycle routes, because those are already covered in other council plans. We also made the decision to really focus on the curbside as part of the carriageway rather than the spaces on the footpath itself or the footway, because again, that's covered in other council plans. So looking at car clubs, Hounslow currently has 2 round trip or back to base car club operators, Zipcar and Enterprise, which combined have 39 vehicles and about 7,000 members in the borough. And CoMoUK has identified Hounslow as an area of high potential for more car club uptake, noting that about 22% of Hounslow households owning a car could use car club for their journey. So building on that, our strategy calls for a phased expansion of our car club scheme, with this map identifying high, medium, and low demand locations for new car club bays across the borough. We also plan to introduce flexible or one-way car clubs, and we're exploring EV charging for our car club bays as well. On the micromobility side, Hounslow launched an e-bike share scheme in June 2023. We signed an MOU with Lime, who were already operating an unofficial free-floating scheme in the borough. We then installed over 265 parking bays across the borough via experimental traffic management orders, essentially treating that first year as a trial and giving residents a chance to try it out and let us know how it was working. The scheme was implemented in 3 phases, starting in the east of the borough, which is closer to central London, where the e-bike market was already very well established, and then moving west to cover the entire borough. In terms of results of this trial, across the first 16 months of operation, we saw ridership increase 132%, which you can see in the chart. The green bars show ridership from the free floating scheme that was operated by Lime, and then the purple shows ridership after we installed the parking bays and began more formal operations. So you can see the increases with some seasonal peaks and troughs. We've also seen the number of active users increase by 100% in that time, while parking compliance has averaged 95% according to Lime data, although we do still get complaints about misparked bikes. In terms of actions, our curbside strategy includes making the e-bike scheme permanent, which we're in the process of doing right now. And it also includes exploring adding a second e-bike operator, as well as joining the shared e-scooter trial and launching a curbside e-cargo cycle trial, which would complement our existing scheme with Pedal My Wheels. Now, there are always competing demands for curbside space. So as such, our strategy introduced a curbside spatial framework just to help prioritize curbside space in different areas of the borough. So first, we've identified 4 urban typologies, including town centers and high streets, movement corridors, residential areas, and then neighborhood initiatives. And then we outlined which elements are higher or lower priorities in each typology, recognizing that things like safety and accessibility are essential everywhere. So priority is given to curbside uses at the top of the hierarchy, but there is flexibility here, and site-specific context is always important. In yellow and pink, I've highlighted the shared transport elements, just so you can see where they fall under each typology. And then just to wrap things up, I've outlined 3 lessons learned through our planning process. First, having a clear rationale and location strategy is important. A lot of work went into locating things like the e-bike parking bays, the car club bays, etc. Second, demonstrate balance when it comes to parking. We did this by developing a parking strategy at the same time as our curbside strategy. Parking loss does remain an emotive issue, particularly in the outer London context, and there are revenue impacts to consider as well. Third, plan for thorough internal and external engagement. So develop a comms plan, make sure you have enough resources on that communications plan, and then having early engagement with ward members is critical, as is making sure that the cabinet member is briefing them. And then also having a set of FAQs ready to go saves a lot of time when dealing with the inevitable casework that's going to come. And that's it. Thanks for your time, everyone. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Are you on mute, Laura?
Oh, I don't know how I managed that. Sorry. Thank you so much, PJ. That was really interesting and really helpful hints and tips at the end. So thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions for PJ at the moment? Please put them in the chat or raise your hand. We've got one question here, PJ. Did you get any pushback from businesses? If so, how do you manage that? Loss of
Sure,
car parking, etc.
Sure, thank you. Yeah. The development of the strategy itself did predate my time at the council. So I've come in at a time when we're looking to implement most of this stuff. My experience so far has been mostly pushback on the resident side, but there have been cases where there have been businesses who've been concerned about parking loss or concerned about things like loading bay management, that sort of thing. We will look at cases on an individual, site by site basis and assess whether we think there is an impact. For example, we had one that came in that was looking at an e-bike bay that had been placed in front of a business, and we, assessed it on site, determined there were sufficient loading bays nearby to serve the purpose, and it wasn't, impacting anything per se. Part of it is also looking at, that parking loss. So we have had some pushback I've seen in the casework, but really it's just about communicating that balance, trying to make sure that the businesses and residents know that these curbside spaces can be used for multiple things, and that, there is parking available elsewhere if needed. So it's really back to that communications piece and being flexible too. There are cases where we have had to, go back and say, okay, we can move this bay if needed.
Great, thank you. We've got a few more. PJ, you've got a few questions here. So, which engagement method worked best to convince people to use shared transport?
In terms of convincing people to use shared transport, as I mentioned on the micromobility side, there was already sort of a scheme operating. So in the London context, there was already e-bike use in central London, which kind of was making its way into our borough, kind of in the east of our borough. So even before we established the scheme, there was already sort of a market that was existing. By establishing the scheme, we were trying to rectify issues like misparked bikes on the pavement to improve accessibility, that sort of thing. But there were already people using the scheme. The one thing we are trying to do is get people across the entire borough out in some of the more car-oriented areas to use it more. We're still working on that. For now, a model that we've been using is induced demand. So ensuring that with the operator, we are getting them to rebalance the bikes in a way that there must be bikes in those bays, because we've heard it, it can be slightly less profitable to operate or just more challenging because it's further away from central London. But we want to make sure there are bikes there, because if people have access to those bikes, then they're more likely to use them. So first, making sure we have enough bays to service that area. So working on placing the bays in a way that people can be within an easy walking distance to them. And then secondly, making sure those bays are stocked with bikes. So that's an ongoing thing that we're doing with operators. So just making sure people can see that and have access to it. And then on the comm side, just making sure that people are aware of the opportunity to use these bikes, working to get, advertise the passes so that they know that there's discounts available, that sort of thing. And I think it's similar on the car club front, but maybe I'll stop for now.
I'm going to ask you one more because I'm just conscious of time.
Sure.
So the propensity for car club bays in different locations across the borough. Could you expand on how has that worked out?
Yeah, so far it's been working well, but we are looking to expand quite a bit. So I think the initial trial was looking at areas where, we at CoMoUK had identified areas of potential high demand just based on the characteristics of that area. I think we've seen fairly good usage, but we're looking to fairly aggressively expand that so that more people have access to it and more people have it as an option. Part of that will be working with the operators though to make sure that expansion is feasible for them as well. So we're in the process of that. So in terms of making sure that there's enough car club bays everywhere, that's something that's a bit of a work in progress right now. But the mapping was based on sort of potential demand identified in partnership between, borough officers and CoMoUK with their studies.
That's great. Thank you, PJ. There's a few questions there. Feel free if you want to go into the chat and answer them. And if we've got a chance for a panel at the end, people can also ask them then. But thank you very much. That was great. Can we move now on to the next speaker, please? Hi, Carolyn. Lovely to have you here from Possible.
Morning.
Are you ready to go ahead? Thank you.
Okay, lovely. Just sharing my slides. Okay. Hold on a sec. Oh, not to worry. I've lost my presenter view, but not to worry. We'll just go through the slides as they are. Um, so I'm going to introduce Possible's work on space equity, curbside greening and parking. And we're a national climate charity. We've done a lot of work on parklets, initially as part of our Car-Free Cities campaign, which ran for 3 years across Birmingham, Bristol, London, and Leeds. So really trying to challenge the narrative around what our streets are for. We produce a number of different resources, really trying to raise people's awareness around parklets. Our parklet plotter enables anybody to plot where they would like to see a parklet for maximum social benefit. So we compared data sets around access to green space and public space in London and lowest car ownership. Sorry, not just in London, across all 4 cities. We also did some nice data viz about parking stats, comparing the cost of suspending a parking bay with the cost of parking a car. That had quite a bit of traction on Twitter, as it was at the time. For Car Free Day in 2021 and 2022, we did a number of pop-up parklets. So this is a little bit like CoMoUK's pop-up mobility hubs. I think these are really powerful in articulating and showing people how differently our streets could be used, particularly how we could be using the curbside to really help people to reclaim their streets. We worked with a few schools on that. In terms of the impact of our campaign, we helped to influence Lambeth's ambitious curbside strategy and Waltham Forest's community parklet policy. We had over 1,500 people lobbying their councils, calling for action on parklets. I think that's probably gone up actually since then. And we've got a nice animation here that we produced that shows very clearly how we can be transforming our streets. We were featured in the Streets Ahead podcast. And we also had a nice piece in the Daily Mail about our Car-Free Visions project, where we had produced visualizations working with local communities for how they'd like to see their streets looking in a car-free future. And we've had other media coverage, such as in The Guardian and on BBC Earth. So after Car Free Cities campaign finished, we then launched a dedicated parklets campaign, looking to work with community groups to create community parklets, and also trying to influence more councils in London to adopt community parklet policies. Oh, I wasn't actually planning to play that. I'll skip the video. That's on the website if anybody wants to have a look at it. Now, interestingly, we had a lot of applications from community groups and organisations in boroughs where there is no parklet policy or process. So unfortunately, we couldn't progress those applications, but we did build a couple in Hackney and one in Waltham Forest. So this is a really nice one on the Nightingale estate in Hackney, the first one on a housing estate, which includes seating. It's been very popular with the local community, and it's part of really greening up that corner of their estate, which was previously dominated by commuter parking, like many housing estates. We have another one that we made with 1.5 Ardley Road, and that's a co-working space in de Beauvoir town in Hackney. And this is a little one that we made with a couple of residents in Leighton. That includes cargo bike parking and some planters. And we've also got our parking action tool that we launched earlier this year, which basically enables people to assess their council's parking policies against their climate policies. So we know that parking is often used for increasing revenue and managing parking demand, rather than actually as a way to transform our streets into this. And we would like to see more councils basically taking that on board, because we found that even councils that have declared a climate emergency and have climate strategies are not necessarily doing enough to really use parking to tackle climate change. So what we did was to team up with CPRE London, Living Streets and Wheels for Wellbeing to create this online tool CPRE London had already created a parking policy benchmark, and that's based on the Reclaim the Curb report from Centre for London that came out in 2020. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. That's a really excellent report about reimagining the curbside. And these are the kind of things that we're looking for in the online tool around curbside use. There's lots of different things in there. You can have a little play around with the tool. And ultimately, when you use the tool, it gives you a score for your local authority. It's a bit like an Ofsted report. You get a good or requires improvement or needs urgent action. We also published a map of the results for all London boroughs, having assessed them all using the tool. I would just caveat that with the fact that the data is perhaps a year out of date now. So if you're from a local authority that has updated your parking policy within the last few months, then that might impact on your score. But ultimately, we found that all London boroughs, even the ones that are doing good work in this area, the maximum score was only about 60%. So there's far more that boroughs need to be doing. And some of the outer London boroughs scored as low as about 6 or 7%. So you can have a little play around with the parking action tool. And ultimately, we are calling for all London councils to commit to allocating 25% of their curbside for sustainable uses. We want to see more London boroughs with community parklet policies. We'll be publishing a toolkit in the new year, one for local authorities and one for prospective community parklet keepers. And that's as a result of interviewing those 4 boroughs that do have existing parklet policies and trying to just kind of share that learning and the nuts and bolts of the different ways of doing it and the different pros and cons. And we'll be doing an in-person event to launch that. So keep an eye out for that. And then just to wrap up, we have a new campaign, Get Shady, funded by City Bridge Trust, working with 4 London boroughs to basically swap cars for parking spaces on London's hottest streets. So we're going to be comparing different data sets in the areas where we've got the narrowest pavements, the hottest streets, the least tree canopy and the lowest car ownership. And then we'll be organising thermal comfort walks with local communities to identify where those trees are most needed and replacing those parking spaces with street trees. I think that brings us to the end. But please do feel free to use our resources on Parklets. They're all in the public domain. My details are there if anybody wants to reach out. And if there are any London boroughs, particularly on this call today, who have made changes to their Parklet policies, then please do let me know so I can make sure that our Parklets toolkit is as up to date as possible when it's published. Thanks very much. Looking forward to some questions, hopefully.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. That was really interesting and great to see that you had some similar learning from your Parklets that we have from the pop-up hubs as well, which is good to see. So we've got a few questions in the chat, and I see Mark Strong, you have your hand up. Would you like to go first?
Thanks, Laura. Yes, Carolyn, obviously everything you do is London-based, and it's great, but what about councils outside London? So all the things like your spreadsheets, you did something on the charges, but those tables, I know that you're going to say it's probably a funding thing, but it'd be good to look at, comparisons for places like where I am in Brighton, but across the whole country.
Yeah, absolutely. And we would like to do, I think we're in a position of many national charities that end up doing a fair amount of work in London. The Parklets work is funded by a private donor, and that is restricted to London. And then our Get Shady campaign is also funded by City Bridge Trust, so that's ring-fenced to London as well. But I would say that the existing tools that we made as part of the Car Free Cities campaign can be used in other urban areas. I think the parking action tool does not work so well in rural areas and in areas where you've got a 2-tier council where the parking responsibilities are split. But I think most of our tools can be used in other urban areas, the Parklet plotter as well. It would be great to see more work being done on this across the country, I think. I agree with you.
Keep your questions coming if anybody has any more. Someone had asked Carolyn whether the toolkit is just London specific. Is that the case, or is it wider than that?
The toolkit, I think, also could be useful, again, in other cities. I think the main thing with all of these resources is they're probably a bit harder to apply in areas where there's no controlled parking, because our experiences of trying to get permission for parklets where there are no CPZs is just really difficult, because nobody even really knows whose responsibility it is, and you just go around in circles. It took us about 3 years to spend some money that we had from IKEA to build a parklet in our other cities, and we ended up having to do it in London. But I think the toolkit could be useful, yeah, like I say, in all urban areas.
I think we've got a lot of comments. I think some of them are more comments than questions in the chat, but we can maybe touch on, have a look at them. Carolyn would maybe touch on them in the panel session as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Keith from Happy Way has mentioned the sort of mapping that Lambeth has been doing. That's really useful to have that data. So I'm just trying to, oh no, I'm too high up. I'm trying to find the questions.
I think that was the main. I think we've covered the main questions, but I said we can come back to them in the panel.
Yeah,
there's
that's
so much
fine.
in the chat. It's difficult to find some of it. But thank you so much. Thank you, Carolyn. That was really interesting.
You're welcome. I hope I wasn't rambling too much, as I didn't
No,
have the notes.
not at all. Not at all. Can we now go on to Brock Rogers, please, from Solent Transport? Hi, Brock.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone. I will just share my screen. Which hopefully everyone can now see. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about micromobility carriageway parking and learnings from the Solent area. So our micromobility scheme is funded and managed by the Solent Future Transport Zone, and it's operated by Voi across Southampton, Portsmouth and the Isle of Wight. Voi has been our sole operator for e-scooters and e-bikes since the 1st of July 2024. Previously, we had Voi as our e-scooter operator and Borough as our bike share operator. And yeah, we've now got carriageway parking in both Southampton and Portsmouth. We became the first area outside of London to deliver micromobility carriageway parking, with the first bays being installed in Southampton in July 2023. Some of the successes include we've had a really high consultation success rate. So particularly compared to our footway sites, where we use the S115E consultation process, which includes veto power for frontages. So quite a lot of sites unfortunately get blocked at the consultation, but we haven't, that veto power isn't present in the TRO process that we use for carriageway bays. And as a result, we've had an 80% consultation success rate. So that's been great. We've also had a really high parking compliance, so 96% parking compliance across all the carriageway bays in the area. And this is pretty much equal to footway bays as well. Actually, we also have good compliance for footway bays. So to date, we've had 24 carriageway bays installed so far across Southampton and Portsmouth. And of these, one has been a combined micromobility and EV charging hub. And of the 24 as well, 8 have been in locations where there were already footway bays present. And as a result of installing the carriageway bay, we've been able to remove that footway bay. So this means this sort of supports our aims, because we're able to declutter the footway, and essentially we're taking space away from cars rather than people. This has been fully supported by our Micromobility Equalities Forum that we run quarterly, and some of the visual impairment groups that attend the forum have been particularly supportive of our carriageway parking. There have been some challenges though, so I think one of the main ones is just the lengthy process to get the bays approved. Each TRO consultation to date has taken over 6 months, but they've also all fallen within pre-election period, so we've had to pause for a couple of months in each of them. They're also quite expensive per bay, so the first TRO was £3,600 per bay, and that included consultation fees, physical parking corrals, bollards, installation fees and road markings. Our second TRO, we were able to reduce the cost per bay a little to £2,000, or quite a lot actually, to £2,000. And this was partially down to doing a larger batch of sites, so we were able to realise economies of scale. And also for that batch, we only used the cheaper bollard option. We have had some negative press just on 2 sites, so which yeah, was due to a contractor installation error, and also with this year, with the double pre-election period, with the local elections and the general elections, it meant there was a really long time between the consultation and the actual installation of the bays, and so those, I think, were the causes of that negative press. There's also been some teething issues on some sites. So this photo here is our combined micromobility and EV charging bay, and yeah, to begin with, there were some issues with scooters being left in the electric car bit of the bay, but whereas they should be on the left side of the image. But yeah, that's now been resolved. And yeah, although we've had some small teething issues for some sites, we haven't had to, from all the bays that have been installed, none have had to be permanently removed. So we've kept them all. So that's been sort of a big success. So I'd just like to share some of the learnings from our process, as we feel like, yeah, we've done this quite a few times now. So we've got quite a robust process. So right back at the start, we began by reviewing existing real life examples from elsewhere. So London was the only place in the UK at this stage with carriageway parking. So we had a look at examples from London. We used also examples from our operator Voi. They shared European examples from Bergen in Norway because they didn't have any carriageway bays in the UK yet. And from reviewing these examples, we're able to determine our own approach in the Solent to parking infrastructure, and we came up with two solutions. So for quieter streets, we used a painted bay with bollards on either side, and this was a cheaper option and worked really well for quieter streets. And then for slightly busier areas, we used a slightly more expensive option, which was a painted bay with a parking corral in it. And we used our highways contractor, Balfour Beatty in Southampton and Colas in Portsmouth, to purchase the bollards and the light to do the lining, and then we used cycle hoop for the parking corrals. Yeah, another thing we learned is don't delay, set out a clear implementation timeline. It's a lengthy process, as I've said. Also, we had to apply for DFT e-scooter road marking authorization, and this took 8 weeks. We only had to do that once right at the start. We developed our own risk assessment checklist, and this has been really useful for reducing the burden on officers and ensuring high quality sites are proposed. So yeah, Voi, at the start of the process, Voi proposes a load of sites to us, and they have to fill out this checklist of about 12 criteria for each site, and it has to pass all of them to proceed. And yeah, that creates a lot of efficiencies. So right back at the start, we started with a small scale trial with monitoring to ensure a robust process. And actually, we found that monitoring to be really useful. So for every carriageway bay that goes in, we monitor compliance and the usage of the live bays for 3 months following installation. And as I already mentioned, no bays that have been installed have had to be removed. And I think that monitoring has been really useful for that, because it's helped us identify small issues and sort of tinkering with certain bays to make them viable, and they've all remained in place. We also made it a procurement requirement for suppliers in our sole operator procurement that we did earlier this year to develop their own parking infrastructure designs based on our learnings. And that's been really useful. So going forward, Voi will be providing their own infrastructure, but based on the sort of design requirements that we provided. So looking ahead, we've got a long way to go. Only 24 of our 662 total bays are on the carriageway, but we're aiming to install at least 100 next year. And the good news is next year there's no elections at all, so we shouldn't get slowed down by any pre-election periods. And we're targeting to plug gaps in the network to increase parking density specifically, but also to slowly replace footway parking with carriageway parking. Voi will also be applying for a Streetworks accreditation license, so it can do its own installations of its own infrastructure, and that should hopefully improve efficiency and reduce cost. So that was a whistle-stop tour of Solent micromobility parking on the carriageway. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions.
I have a few questions. Thank you, Rock, that was great. Firstly, from Oliver, is the goal to only have carriageway bays wherever possible and only have pavement bays where carriageway bays cannot be implemented? There's 2 parts to this. And are you installing these bays alongside regular cycle parking carriageway bays to avoid cycle parking on footways?
So for the first part, I'd say yes, that is our aim. Particularly in Southampton, the aim is to have all micromobility parking on the carriageway where possible, but there's some locations, like we're looking at installing some bays at St Mary's Football Stadium, soon, and there's a large area where there is no carriageway. There's a big area of footway, which would be ideal. So sometimes the footway is still the better option, but yeah, predominantly we're aiming for carriageway parking. And no, we haven't looked at installing cycle parking alongside carriageway parking. I think that's mainly just because of funding, really. We're funded specifically to deliver the micromobility scheme, so we've kind of focused on that.
Cool. Thank you. And another one is, have you seen any impact on pavement riding with the introduction of carriageway parking?
Yeah, so I think that's one thing that it definitely helps with, because yeah, if a user starts their journey on the carriageway, they're less likely to then go onto the footway. And I don't have any data on it, but it's definitely one of the sort of reasons that we use to support the case for carriageway parking. And it's also one of the things that at our Equalities Forum, lots of the visual impairment charities are supportive of carriageway parking for that reason.
Thank you. Another one for you. How did you get round the issue of any loss of parking revenue from converting parking bays to e-scooter bays?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in Southampton, they have a 2022 parking policy, which specifically makes a commitment to reallocate curbside space towards active travel and e-scooter parking and cycle parking. So that was really useful. But typically, so I mentioned the risk assessment checklist. We kind of have a note in there also to try and avoid pay and display parking bays where possible. And to avoid like resident parking areas if possible. If there's two sites and one doesn't fall into those areas, then we target that because it will be an easier win. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't consider bays that are in resident parking areas. And I think because we've basically spent almost 3 years focusing on footway parking, or 2 years maybe focusing on footway parking, and we've pretty much exhausted all of the viable footway space in the city. But now we're switching over to carriageway parking. There's so much carriageway parking space that we can generally, so far anyway, propose sites that aren't in resident parking permit areas or pay and display areas.
Thank you. I've got one more for you, and then I'll let you off because you've had quite a few here. How is the scheme branded, marketed to users? What is the user interface? How does the pricing work to incentivise usage over behavioural change nudges? Sorry, there's a couple of questions amongst that.
Yeah, so I guess all of the marketing and branding is led by Voy, but we also have branding of our Micromobility as a Service app, Breeze, as well. So it's kind of co-branded with Voy. In terms of encouraging uptake, I think, what we've learned is, the key way to increase uptake is to increase the parking density. So we're aiming across all areas to have a minimum of 3-minute walk between parking bays, and that seems to be the best way to encourage take up. So this year we've had a big increase in take up, which has sort of coincided of us introducing more parking. But like as an idea, in Southampton and Portsmouth we have 6 parking bays per kilometre squared, and what we're aiming for is, I think somewhere like Liverpool has 20 parking bays per kilometre squared. That's kind of what we're aiming at. So we've added a lot of bays, but we've still got a long way to go.
Well, good luck with all that, Brock. It sounds great, and good luck with it all. If any more questions for Brock, we can ask them at the panel at the end, but I would like to move on to Paul Curtis now, please, from SLR. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everybody. Good to be here. Can you see my screen?
You need to put it in slide sharing format, I think.
That's good.
Live view, yeah.
How about now?
That's it. That's great. Thank you, Paul.
Brilliant. Yeah, hi, everybody. Good to be here. My name is Paul Curtis. I work for SLR Consulting. We're an environmental consultancy, and I'm the director of the research and development team based within transport and mobility planning. I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach to accessing shared mobility, but from the context of new residential developments and sort of designing this into the master planning process. As SLR, we've been big supporters of visionary planning for quite a while now, sort of based around the two components really: placemaking, so designing communities in the way in which we want them to be lived, and focusing on bringing amenities closer to the homes so that it's easier to walk and cycle and live low-car lifestyles. And on the mobility side, ensuring again from the master planning stages that there is a layer of shared mobility service covering the new development and connecting it with nearby onward destinations. So from the sort of planning perspective, we've done a lot of research recently into National Travel Survey data, and it's given us a really strong evidence base, which tells us that if the destination is more than a mile from one's origin, the majority of those trips are going to be made by private car. This is based on, the current designs of towns and villages. If you bring that destination to within a mile, or even better, half a mile, then suddenly the vast majority of trips are made on 2 feet or on 2 wheels. And so within the master planning process, this is where we really push strongly with all stakeholders. Firstly, on the placemaking side, to bring as many of those destinations as possible within a walking or cycling distance. And that's going to make the biggest savings in terms of vehicle miles traveled, but also realizing carbon emission savings. But then equally on the shared mobility side, to ensure that there are shared mobility services dotted around the site, including mobility hubs, and both for internal trips, but for onward destinations. And that's why in our transport planning team and engineering teams, when it comes to designing the streets and the curb spaces, that we ensure that the space is allocated in a way in which we want to maximize those low carbon movements. So be it in terms of active travel corridors or access elsewhere. And in many of our schemes now, we integrate mobility hubs within the master plan so that it allows from the offset of a new development that it is lived in the way which is helping to meet the objectives of the vision, low car living. And that, of course, does mean having more considerations for the users of the street, where you are having more of a shared space and a mix of those shared modes. And we're working on a project at the moment in the north of the UK, where we've done a number of feasibility studies for the optimal location of mobility hubs. This is in existing towns and villages rather than the master planning stages. And it's here that we're deploying the same thinking in terms of this particular site, where the hub has been, the location's been selected on its proximity to the current bus station to maximize the potential for intermodality between the public transport and the shared mobility modes within the hub. The fact that it's close to the street is great because it's going to do a lot of its own marketing. It's going to be very visible. So that's the best location in that sense. The next steps will be, how do we ensure the safe and efficient interchanges between those modes based on the additional pressure that it will put on that street space, and whether or not also to integrate any other shared mobility access from the carriageway. And I just wanted to mention also, within our company, we have many disciplines, and in this project, we've brought together a transport planning team, architecture design team, and a grid connection team, and it's been a really satisfying combination of expertise, where we've been able to give recommendations on the types of shared mobility services for each of the hubs based on local demographics and other indicators from the transport planning side. From the design side, then that's been translated into indicative floor layouts for the hubs in terms of the mobility parts, but also the supporting features and implications for the required space for those components. And then finally, on the grid connection side, so our team has been liaising with the DNO, and they've been able to work out different options. So some of these hubs will have a number of EV chargers. So it's been important to work out the existing capacity in the grid for the locations, the optimal locations from the transport planning side, and then give alternative connection options, because some of these sites are restrained in terms of the surrounding street space, and we've been able to give scenarios where additional substations, where they've been perceived to be required, they can actually be positioned away from the hub site, and then the cabling done from there, and that gives us more space to work with within the site itself and the various different users that would be using that site. I'm just going to stop there as a taster, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Paul. That's really interesting to end our presentations. Some great work that you're doing there. We do have some questions, so I'll just go ahead with the first one. Paul, do you include car clubs in your planning or in your mobility hubs to discourage car ownership, which is the best way to encourage take-up of active travel and public transport?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have, through our in-house design team, we've developed a mobility hub design, which is really based on it's a modular design where, depending on the community it's serving and the scale, you can either scale up or down different components. So it might be in a particular site there'd be a bigger need for car sharing bays, whereas in another site it might be more on active travel. So you can, like a jigsaw puzzle, you can sort of take out one component and replace it with additional others, depending on what the priority use is for that particular area.
Do you have any more questions for Paul at the moment? Don't we have any hands up? Just having a wee check. No, I'm sure we'll have some. Oh, there's another one popping up here. Paul, where did you see taxi bays and hub design?
I'm a big fan of ride hailing, as I guess the Americans call it, and it means I don't need to own a car. I live in suburban London. So personally speaking, I think there's a big role for on-demand taxis, whether it's DRT 8-seaters or whether it's 4-seaters. And again, within the designs that we have and that we build into the mixed-use development master plans, we do have these pick-up drop-off bays sitting alongside bus stops, and so there is space allocated at that stage of the planning process for taxis, e-taxis, ride-hailing, DRT, particularly as technology is evolving. And in many cases, these schemes won't be completed for many years hence, and so we need to be sort of on the cusp of what's happening technologically to make sure that the space is current when it becomes fully occupied.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Last question: what would be the key parameters to measure the success of a mobility hub? We could all probably answer it instead.
That's probably a good question for everyone to picture them.
Yeah, but you can picture
I mean, uptake, obviously, in terms of the users. The type of hub obviously will determine what success means, and you will have larger ones. Again, within our larger sites, we consider the mobility hub really as the community hub as well. So it's there that we would expect to sort of co-locate a cafe or bike repair or an upcycling shop, or so you might think the success factors of a larger hub like that are not just on the uptake of the mobility component, but also on the social economic success of the wider facilities. If you go further out to the periphery of a new site, where the hubs might be much smaller in scale, then indeed that might be in terms of uptake, also availability. I'm a little bit obsessed with e-bikes in London at the moment. They're just so fun and quick and convenient. They're not that cheap, but uptake can be high, but availability is then also extremely important for success. And if I get an early train into Waterloo, I know there's going to be a bike waiting for me, and I book it on my app before I even get into the station. If I get a later train, then I'm already getting a bit anxious because I know that there might not be a bike there for me. So, you know, I suppose success factors can be in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, that first and last mile is really interesting in terms of bike share at train stations, and we've done a lot of work around that, and it's part of some of the work we've done around our pop-up projects. But yeah, in terms of the mobility hubs, just all the services provide are key essential tools to communities, aren't there? So it's not just about the travel transport element, it's wider than that. One very last question, hopefully you can, I think it's a quick answer. She says, who pays for the ongoing maintenance, and what is the cost for local authorities?
Again, you know, we haven't got these in the ground yet, all built and operational, but we are definitely in the process of working out what the business case and the operating models will be. And there are, you know, CoMo's done good research into this, and they've got guidance on operational models. There's one site that's got planning permission where there's a community hub, a mobility hub in there, and we actually had discussions with a local charity organisation, and in terms of the operation of the hub, which would be sort of a community hub vibe, so it would have cafe as well as the mobility elements. The running of it would be by the charity organisation, so that's kind of like some of the costs there. And then in terms of the servicing and the relocating of the different shared mobility providers, those are still conversations to be had with the options of companies that are coming in. But I think the answer is shared. It's going to be shared amongst more than a single organisation.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Paul. Carolyn, I see you've got your hand up. I'm going to bring everyone back for the panel, and then you can, just I'm conscious of time, and then you can ask your question then, if that's okay. But thanks, Paul. Thanks very much. So, Carolyn, do you want to go ahead with what your point or question was? You're on mute. Can't hear you at the moment. No, still can't hear you. Well, while you're figuring that out, we'll go to the chat and see if we've had anybody got any questions for. Oh, you're sorted. Brilliant.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead, please.
I can't hear you guys though. Hang on.
The joys.
Okay, sorry. I don't know what happened there. I did unmute, but anyway, I just unplugged my headphones, and I think I can hear you guys now. Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to that point about I can't comment on mobility hubs, but regarding parklets, it does vary a bit from one local authority to another. and this is covered in our parklets toolkit actually, and it depends on the type of parklet, but normally a community parklet would be maintained, whether it's been installed by, funded by and insured by the council, as it is in some boroughs, or whether it's been funded, installed and insured by the parklet keeper. The maintenance would usually be the responsibility of the parklet keeper under an agreement that they would have with the local authority. And business parklets would normally be maintained by that business. And then you've got models like Waltham Forest, where they've worked with a number of, like, they're public community parklets open to everybody. You don't necessarily need to buy a drink from the cafe that's looking after it, but there will be a nominated organisation that's responsible for the maintenance in that scenario.
Thank you. Brock, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just thought I could come in on that question about ongoing maintenance with regard to micromobility carriageway parking. So yeah, when we were doing our initial scoping, one of the options we looked at was having bays with planters on either side, but sort of specifically for that ongoing maintenance reason, we decided not to go with that approach. And sort of the solutions that we've gone for are in place with the aim that they have sort of as little ongoing maintenance as possible. Although just the other week we had our first bollard that was reversed into by a car and was knocked down. So at the moment, all of the bays are owned by the council. So that, yeah, ongoing cost comes to the council. But in the future, yeah, the bays may be owned by the operator. So that, yeah, there may be an opportunity for those costs to go to the operator, or at least be shared a bit more.
We have a thanks, Brock. We have a question in the chat from Mark. What have been the responses to general public opposition to parklets, bays, etc.? Have councillors been prepared to be robust when there are local campaigns? I've got interesting stories on that one, but I'll let the panel go first. Anyone want to come in?
I could say something there. I think
Yeah.
with all of the consultations we've done for footway parking, that's kind of put us in good stead for the carriageway bays. So we always receive, the same generic objections, which are generally around people not liking e-scooters, thinking that it's going to bring antisocial behaviour, etc. But we've got lots of evidence to show that, there's no evidence that that's the case. So we have a load of standard responses for those kind of objections, and really, I guess we're really looking for objections that might identify a health and safety issue that we hadn't sort of considered, or if a bay it receives lots and lots of objections, then just sometimes politically we decide, yes, perhaps not a good idea to go ahead.
Yeah, that's helpful, thank you. We do a lot of consultation before we put a pop-up in place. So we engage with local residents, local shops, businesses. We tend to sometimes, especially if we're putting it in a parking space, we tend to get a bit of pushback. And so in one of our first places, we did get some pushback, and one of the councillors got a bit concerned about it. But we found with the pop-ups, people initially complain, and then when they get an understanding of it, then it stops. So once the complaint stopped, the councillor changed their mind and they didn't want it moved and they were happy with it. So I think for us, engagement is kind of key, and I think especially for the pop-ups, once people physically see it and they understand it, then they go, all right, okay, that's fine. I think sometimes it's the concept that they're not sure of, especially if it is taking a parking space. We find there is some pushback from there.
I was going to say really quickly from the Hounslow side, I'd say your answer is fairly similar to what Brock mentioned. We do have a strong cabinet member on this who's very supportive of it, but there is always pushback. But we try to look at the pushback through the lens of safety and operational concerns for the most part, noting that that e-bike bay was probably previously a parking spot. So if you're looking at things like sight lines and visibility and that sort of thing wasn't an issue before, it hasn't changed since we've installed it. And then just trying to deal with any site-specific things, like as Brock mentioned.
Yeah, I have another question for everyone. In small towns and areas, how do you prototype bicycle lanes, almost as MVP for councils to work out whether they should invest further or not? Anyone like to tackle that one? No. Paul, would you like to tackle it? No.
I think, you start off with a temporary and then go from there.
Yeah.
Temporary sometimes becomes permanent.
So another question is, can or has any of your work research also been applied to the general removal consolidation of street clutter, example poles, signage, etc., and the benefits of this?
I could say something there. I mean, yeah, not so much the removal of street clutter, but when we're looking to place a parking bay on either the footway or the carriageway, we often, if there's also a sort of clutter zone, like, a verge and lamppost, for example, we aim to put the parking bay in line with that clutter zone to try and keep the pedestrian desire lines clear.
Yeah. I don't think we've got any more. Some great chat going on, and people have a time have a look at it. Some great chat around people answering each other's questions. So, really interesting. Oh, we might have one last one. No, the chat's also fun today. It's playing around a wee bit. No, I think that's the sort of main ones. Does anyone of the panel want anything else they want to add before we finish up, or?
Can I just add, addressing Mark's question a bit about opposition to parklets and so on, and whether councillors are prepared to be robust when there are local anti-campaigns. I think it's really important to support residents if there is pushback where they've got community parklets installed, and to sort of really give them that support. So what some councils have done is shift the process a little bit from saying, oh, this is an individual's parklet, that they've applied for, to saying, it's kind of council resident, partnership, so that the council can kind of take more of that flack. Because, we have had instances where people have received threats of violence for wanting a parklet on their street. We don't want to put people off, but there can be, obviously a lot of pushback. And in the case studies that we've done in the toolkit that's coming out, the main message is just lots of engagement, lots of talking to your neighbours. Very often it's all about that fear of change, fear of the unknown, and actually talking to people and listening to their concerns and involving them as much as possible in the design and in the ideas for the parklet is really the best way forward, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Carolyn. We found that as well. I think with the pop-ups, you have to do it with the community, not to them. You can't just drop it there and go, isn't this lovely? There has to be a lot of work around it. And that's why we run a lot of different activities from our pop-ups as well, to try and engage with the community. I think that's us. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's been a brilliant session. Thank you to everybody for speaking, and thank you to everyone asking all the great questions, lots of things on the chat. I'm sorry I have missed a few. There was a lot going on. I will come back to some of them, were particularly about the pop-ups, so I can come back to those people separately. I also would like to thank our sponsors, Artidis and SLR. We have another session, so we're delighted if you could join us for our next session. That's a sustainable and inclusive version of EV transition. That'll be after lunch between 1:30 and 2:45. But thanks again for joining, and it was lovely to see you all and hear all your the great work that you're doing and hear all your questions as well. Thank you so much.